Hello, everyone. We have a good show for you as always. And on the show today, we have Mike Johnson, and he is really getting some of his troops riled up. We'll tell you why and what's going on with that, and a big fight looming in Congress over potential aid to Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel, all separately. We're going to break down. I'll tell you what I think about that from a progressive perspective. We'll go at it from a political perspective, and we'll also, take a look at how likely it is to pass and some of the fractures that are also going to be emerging in the Republican Party, probably much more so the Republican Party over Ukraine than the Democratic Party over Israel. So we'll get you all into that and tell you why that's going on. Also, a pretty big breaking situation going on at Columbia University as the president there has called in the NYPD to clear out campers on the front lawn. They're probably getting a lot of donor pressure from that. There's been campers there for about a week or so now on the grounds, essentially camping out for Palestine as they kind of occupy Columbia situation for Palestinian rights. Apparently, we're also hearing that Ilhan Omar's daughter has also been suspended from that university. She tweeted that a few hours ago. Also going to be just the general latest on what's happening in Palestine in a big situation with Arizona Republicans with regard to abortion. We've got a great show for you today. As always, this is Newsflash. All right, so we get right at it today with Mike Johnson and his aid bills. There's the explainer in The Guardian from Jonathan Yerushalmi. We'll see if we can break into that. So U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson has said long-awaited votes for aid on Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific will take place as soon as Saturday night, putting the senior Republican on a collision course with members. By the way, he's not a very senior Republican. This is somebody who, this is a corn-fed, really idiot, straight out of the center of the Republican caucus that they put as Speaker of the House just to kind of please everyone when Kevin McCarthy was turfed out of there, as Mike Johnson probably will be turfed out of there. Like, this is not somebody who's a senior Republican. This is not someone who has, broad trust of the caucus. This is a relative nobody, a relative kind of newbie here. At stake is $95 billion. By the way, again, this is such a great point that have been made so many different places, especially just after tax day in the United States, this is where $95 billion of your taxpayer money is going. And how many people support, I'm sure probably the most support is Taiwan, but how many people support the money to Israel, the money to Ukraine with no plan? It's like, it's an absolute insult, and it cannot be, there couldn't be a better reminder, especially at a period of time like tax day, about just how far we are from having democratic control over our foreign policy, which people may say, people don't really care about foreign policy. It doesn't really affect us. Until it does, with stuff like Ukraine, stuff with Israel, stuff with Taiwan, that really could affect us in the very near future. I don't think Ukraine really is going to play a big role, but also this is where all our money goes. We spent $6 trillion on the war on terror. We spent $95 billion in just this aid package. Think about what Medicare for all costs over 10 years. Think about what making college for free costs over 10 years. Think about what the Green New Deal would cost over 10 years. Think about all those prices that we've heard bandied around like they're absolutely, the highest number in the world, but then this comes through like it's nothing. And there's no real, especially with, you could kind of make, I really disagree, with the Taiwan case, but I feel like especially with the Ukraine case and especially with the Israel case, probably, most egregiously, there is no national security benefit, let alone any kind of immediate national security benefit to be spending this aid. All we are doing is complete, it's so enraging. But Johnson's decision to push ahead with the votes also puts his own job at risk, with at least two Republicans threatening to put forward a motion to remove him just 6 months after he assumed the job. Congress has been frozen for months in its effort to approve military aid for Ukraine, due to growing opposition among Republicans. And if we talk about some of the, just the moral kind of versus political side here on Ukraine, I feel like, it's again, it's probably something that we could do kind of a whole episode about it, but if we look at what we've been doing since 2002, we've essentially come in with our, really, again, American hubris striking again, thinking that we could push the Ukrainians across the line to essentially destroying Vladimir Putin and essentially weakening him to a permanent end. Instead, what we've happened here is we kind of, we were funding the Ukrainians pretty solidly, then there was a change in government, then October 7th happened, and we have completely let that situation go to pot, to absolute shit, frankly, and now the Ukrainians are in severe trouble. Russia looks set to really make major gains, possibly even more than they ever had into Kyiv, which would really be horrific stuff over the summer because, there's very limited evidence of it. But also, we're getting to a point now where any possible deal was way better than the peace deal that was on the table, early into the war, late into 2022 when this war first began. You're not going to get any real deal better than that at this point. And you got people, getting kidnapped off the streets in Ukraine because so many of the richer young men have already fled because they don't want to be a part of a war that, they're essentially been pushed into by the United States. It's really horrific, Of course, let me just be absolutely clear. Of course, you are rallying, you're getting the guns, you're defending yourself in the moment Russia attacks if you're Ukrainian, which is a perfectly valid thing to do. But, if it hadn't been for Boris Johnson flying in, if it hadn't been for all that Western pressure, would this war not have come to an end when Russia pushed for peace and, Ukraine seemed to go for it at multiple times in late 2022, early 2023? And kind of mid-2023, multiple times were pushed for peace. Could that not have been a different outcome had there not been, we know, Western pressure to keep the war going? And could Ukrainians in the country of Ukraine been in a much better place had that happened? And, a lot of the, territory, they may not have been able to get back Crimea, but they've probably been able to get, some pretty much better situation with Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk regions. That is a situation that not Ukraine forfeited, although I think Ukraine does, the government of Ukraine has been acting in a way that hasn't exactly covered itself in glory since the early days of this conflict. But this is the fault of the Western powers. It's the fault of Joe Biden. It's the fault of the U.S. war machine pushing this to no end because we could say, we have a national security interest here, and that's possibly to take out Russia. And it's just no, it does not make any sense whatsoever. There's no plan. There's no way to say, how do we get the Ukrainians out of it? Do we give them, because it would make sense, give them one last push. We're going to get to this point, and then we're going to stop. At least some understanding there. There's no indication of that. There's just putting money in, just essentially lighting money on fire for a country that, A, doesn't want to fight. The fighting age population at this point is either dead or is in some other Central European city having a great time because they're rich enough to get away from the draft. Or, now at this point, there's just old men. There's people who are mentally stable. There was, video going around of somebody who had Down syndrome being picked up off the street and brought into Ukrainian kind of, army conscription, where this person be trained and sent out in the front lines. There is, this is a country that's just not equipped to fight at the moment, yet we are treating them like they are. We should give them, as much support as we need to get to a certain point that is a justifiable place as we can do with the United States to check Vladimir Putin. But this U.S. hubris has probably taken Ukraine away from having that opportunity, which is really sad. We just don't know exactly what we're going to go through now. So again, it's something that if I were in Congress, I wouldn't vote for it. There's no plan. There's just sending Ukraine, into a path with no end. They should defend themselves. The U.S. should arm them, I believe. And, we already have armed them at this point, so it's kind of beside the point. We send them tons and tons of aid. But I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely stupid just be sending money into a region, don't know where it's going, don't know, what's going to happen to it. Ukrainians tell us absolutely nothing. And this is supposed to be a path for the Ukrainians that's going to supposedly lead them to peace and a more just resolution for the country. I mean, it's insane. It absolutely beggars belief. And the fact that it's even now they're just saying, Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham, they're saying, it's not going to have any impact on the war. But if we don't send them, that's going to be really bad. But if we send the money with no plan, there's going to be no way of any true, win, any true end goal either. And I think the U.S. has every damn right to push for that influence, to vie for that influence, because we're sending them so much money and because we push them to fight past a point they may naturally have not fought, by blowing up the peace negotiations early on. It's a really rough situation. So, yeah, again, I would not have voted for it, with this Ukrainian aid. But, again, it's not nearly as egregious as Israel. And, again, I think the Taiwan situation also, it makes an enemy out of a country that we shouldn't be really making an enemy out of. I think it's much better to, especially at this stage, try and come to better terms with China, and use our power while we still kind of have it. But yeah, so there's been a pretty much just generally a mess though in Congress passing any of this aid period. Because the voice of isolationist Republicans have grown louder, bolstered by former President Donald Trump, who had called foreign aid, said foreign aid should be structured as a loan, not a giveaway, which is a joke because Lindsey Graham, essentially got it so that they wouldn't have the president could cancel, the loan aspect of it and just make it a giveaway, or forgive it, at this point, just generally, which, something that Joe Biden's definitely going to do. And even if it was, someone like Trump won the election, held them to a loan, they wouldn't give it back anyway, and Trump wouldn't have the attention span to force them to give it back. Efforts to pass legislation would secure military assistance for Ukraine hit another barrier in 2023 as some Republicans began to insist the foreign aid bill must be tied to addressing the needs at the U.S.-Mexico border. In February, the Senate voted to block the advancement of a bill that guaranteed foreign aid, also while providing new powers to shut down the border and expedite deportations. Later that month, the Senate passed a bill providing $95 billion of wartime aid to Ukraine, Israel, and other American allies, but containing no provisions related to the border. This was in February. Despite this legislation passing with broad bipartisan support in the Senate, Johnson refused to bring it up to the House. Without the House voting to approve it, the bill remained stalled up until this week. On Tuesday, Johnson unveiled his proposals, these new bills, which are specifically for Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. The package totals $95.3 billion in spending, which matches the total passed by the Senate in February, but contains some differences to win over House conservatives. Aid to Ukraine would total around $61 billion, but more than a third of that would be dedicated to replenishing weapons and ammo systems for the U.S. military, which is, again, just completely unproductive, economic spending. Because a lot of the U.S. concern is, we're sending all their weapons to Ukraine. We're not going to have them in case, Mexico invades us or something. Like, it's just ridiculous. And the $13 billion provided for Ukraine for the previous purchase of weapons from the U.S. is roughly the same as the previous Senate bill. The main difference between the two packages, the House bill provides more than $9 billion in economic assistance in the form of forgivable loans. The Senate bill provides no such provision seeking repayments. The idea of structuring the aid as a loan is key to the reason why Trump supported it. It was essentially a ploy put on by Lindsey Graham to kind of get him to support it. Just being like, oh, you're the apprentice guy, right? You love those loans. And then, of course, Trump buys that hook, line, and sinker. Aid to support Israel and provide humanitarian relief to Gaza comes to more than $26 billion. Let's see how much it goes to which, I think is important to say. And also, by the way, what an absolute joke, right, is this humanitarian aid? Because A, you're defunding UNRWA, which is the most effective provider of humanitarian aid, and B, you're completely letting Israel take as much humanitarian aid in as it wants. Like, they know that those trucks, as we're seeing reports now, they know that those trucks are only 50% full, United States does. They know this full well. They know that Netanyahu gave them this stupid idea for the port thing. They know that they're blocking aid. They know they're attacking, aid workers, this horrific massacre of the World Central Kitchen people, and all those trucks piled up outside on the various crossings that, by the way, have not been open, according to all reports since then, aside from that one stupid tweet by the Israeli mouthpiece, Barak Ravid for Axios. Like, this stuff has not been open. This is an absolute joke. So we're sending more of this money that's not even going to go anywhere. Like, I'm sorry, they should not get any credit for a single penny of foreign aid till they actually force Israel to let in the foreign aid that's already there and punish Israel for its attacks on aid seekers currently. And then, again, a vast majority of the $26 billion they're sending is weapons anyway, so why should it even matter? Even if it gets through, which the United States has taken no action to ensure that it actually does, despite knowing Israel's not getting it through, even if it gets through, it's not nearly enough, and they're just spending more weapons that are going to use to bomb the people in Gaza. Again, it's completely unserious. It's completely a joke, and designed to get idiot rubes or liars to support it, just so they can have a fig leaf to support Biden, to support this bill. And it's also designed to get, rubes, people who don't read enough news to say, oh, at least they're sending some foreign aid to Gaza. That's pretty good. It's a complete lie. It's complete dishonesty. The big question is, will the aid packages pass? Johnson's attempting to corral a divided party, or Republican Party, with the slimmest majorities of majorities in the House. With a number of Republicans avowedly committed to opposing the bills, the Speaker will be relying on support from Democrats to push the legislation through. House Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries has said he plans to gather Democrats for a meeting on Thursday to discuss the package. Our top-line commitment is ironclad, he told reporters. We're going to make sure we stand by our Democratic allies in Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. The proposals have already received a ringing endorsement from Joe Biden, who said he will sign the packages into law immediately should Congress pass them. So again, this is a moment of truth kind of moment for Biden, who came out in the Wall Street Journal supporting this Mike Johnson package. Assuming that Mike Johnson probably is going to lose his job over after this all said and done, with this motion to vacate to kick Johnson out coming very soon in the House floor as well. But in an effort to satisfy conservatives in his own party, Johnson said he will hold a separate vote on a border security package. However, some Republicans had already announced his plan as insufficient. But the question is, again, how many Republicans, so with these bills that are going to be put forth separately in the House, how many Democrats vote against Israel, how many Republicans vote against Ukraine, and will enough cross the aisle on each one? Because, aid for Ukraine is more Democratic coded, aid for Israel is, a bit more Republican coded at this point than Democratic coded. So, how many of those are going to cross the aisle? It's expected that all three will pass. The Indo-Pacific one probably the most easily is going to pass. But how many cross? By the way, if you are especially if you're a progressive and you vote for the Israel bill, I'm done with you. You get out of my book for any consideration as any kind of good politician ever. I'm talking about Ro Khanna, I'm talking about Pramila Jayapal, I'm talking about all these people who are going to be, I'm sure some squishes in the progressive caucus are going to vote for the Israel bill because of the foreign aid thing, but this is a really political death penalty if you vote for this in the House at this point, especially when so many Republicans are probably to cross over and pass for the Israel bill, and so many Democrats are Democrats and Republicans, kind of the uniparty is going to pass the kind of irresponsible Ukraine bill as well. At least 2 House Republican members have threatened to oust Johnson if it goes ahead with the votes. That's, again, as we talked about last show, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie. All right, next story here is the situation on Colombia. It has been a pretty crazy situation. So, essentially, the New York Police Department said on Thursday that at least 108 protesters at Columbia University's campus have been taken into custody after university officials called for law enforcement to respond to a pro-Palestinian demonstration and dismantle a tent encampment. The crackdown prompted more students to vow that demonstrations would continue, expressing outrage at both the roundup of the student protesters and the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. Police officers clad in riot gear and prepared with zip ties began taking protesters into custody just before 1:30 p.m., loading them onto buses without resistance as other students chanted shame. Other officers had removed about 50 tents before demonstrators later put up 3 new ones alongside a Gaza Solidarity encampment sign. Really incredible stuff, again, from the people of Colombia, just putting up this resistance. And I really do agree with the idea that a lot of you see from a lot of universities that there's no business as usual in these institutions. Columbia deeply tied to a lot of the stuff, in a way that a few other universities are through various investments and all the various events they have in their kind of global affairs school and the journalism school and all that. So it's definitely something that uniquely that they can get mad about. But again, this is something that wasn't really disrupting anyone. This was a camp that was out there in the middle of the quad. As people can easily go to class and have been easily probably, I'm sure, going to class in that time. But still, this was cracked down by the police just after, the president spoke yesterday at Congress on another one of these hearings. And just, by the way, just after Ilhan Omar's daughter Ilhan Omar herself questioned the president on the fact that of Colombia, on the fact that there had been really some brutal attacks against pro-Palestinian students, but the university has done absolutely nothing about it. There have been protesters who have been attacked on the campus by other Columbia students, and nothing has been done about it. It's a joke. It's a complete and total joke. The action came the day after university leaders pledged to Congress they would crack down on unauthorized student protests tied to the war in Gaza. The scene was the latest clash and divide that embroiled campuses across the country since the October 7th Hamas-led attack on Israel. So essentially by 3:30 p.m., the scene began to calm, though many demonstrators and officers remained present. Large crowds had rallied with the encamped protesters overnight, and hundreds more convened in front of the Butler Library to call for amnesty for those who had been taken into police custody. So the response drew some pretty mixed reactions. Here, Gerald Nadler, the longest-serving Jewish member of the House and a Columbia alumnus, defended his alma mater on Thursday afternoon. No surprise. Somebody who's deeply tied to AIPAC and the Israel lobby on the Democratic side, one of the kind of biggest representatives in the caucus, for the kind of Israeli interests. Columbia has a right to enforce their own rules, he said, but the free speech organization PEN America called it disturbing to see students taken into custody for peacefully expressing their views. Namat Shafiq, who's the Columbia's president, angered some students and professors during her appearance before the House Committee on Education and the Workforce on Wednesday, where she largely conceded that she felt some of the common chants at pro-Palestinian protests were anti-Semitic. So, from the river to the sea, all that stuff. It's just like, it's not even taken seriously. I think it's been so essentially mainstreamed at this point that some common sense has prevailed, and we just don't concede, just this unchallenged, unchecked chanting on the side of the Israel lobby. This narrative of, it's completely anti-Semitic. This is beyond the pale just to, express a chant peacefully that, is interpreted in the worst possible way by, supporters of Israel when supporters of Palestine mean no such thing. But it is pretty disturbing to see the student, or the president, just blatantly call so many of the students there anti-Semitic, including a lot of Jewish students taking part in that as well. Columbia with a pretty vocal and pretty powerful, outspoken Jewish voice for peace group. Columbia's leadership has also taken action to restrict protests in recent months, hiring external security firms, and brought the NYPD to campus for the first time in decades. In a letter sent Thursday afternoon as the police arrived, Shafiq said she took this extraordinary step because these are extraordinary circumstances. The protests continued on the encampment after the encampment was removed, as other students took the place of those taken into custody. Within a few hours, students had erected new tents and signs on the campus lawn. So we'll see what happens there. And also, to students that were issued with summonses for trespassing, two of them were charged with obstruction of governmental administration, police said. Mayor Eric Adams said that more than 100 protesters occupied a lawn in Columbia's campus for more than 30 hours, saying the police had made more than 108 arrests. So even the mayor there came to speak for this. It's something that real New Yorkers are concerned about. The protest here is just a complete show, a complete and utter show of force against a group of people that are, at the same time are kind of privileged being in their Columbia setting, but also kind of powerless as well, because, they're just students, and, most people don't really care about what they're doing within their Columbia kind of ecosystem, as for the main people in New York, but also, that limits the intention that is going to go to them as well. All right, so we are moving on now to our next story, and just going through some of the major developments in Palestine at the moment. The Gaza-based Palestinian Health Ministry announced that 56 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes over the past 24 hours, while 89 others were wounded. Meanwhile, in the northern Gaza Strip, Israeli forces killed 4 Palestinians in a strike on a school in the Shati refugee camp west of Gaza City. That, again, 56 Palestinians killed, I think, was 11 children. Israeli strikes also killed 12 Palestinians who had gathered to access internet service in the Sheikh Rajwan neighborhood in Gaza City. Just continue, just mowing down of various civilians, gathering, congregating in whatever way, whether it be kids, whether it be, men trying to get internet service or women, just complete onslaught here. Even as this, whole business of will they, won't they retaliate to Iran, looms. This is a genocide that continues here unabated. It's also important to say that in the central Gaza Strip, Israeli forces withdrew from the Nuseirat refugee camp in the village of Migraka after 7 days of siege and raids. During the siege, Israeli forces intensely bombed Nuseirat, especially in the northern part. It's kind of the northern central camp in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, kind of north central location, roughly speaking, just to be absolutely clear. And just right now, though, we're essentially seeing, as I'd say, it's actually more kind of, it's below Gaza City, but above Deir al-Balah. Essentially, in the northern half of the Gaza Strip, there was just continued raids by the Israelis, killing civilians as they prepare now for this Rafah invasion. Speaking of which, continued stories again. It's just like we see one attack on Israel. Hundreds of drones that were telegraphed 72 hours in advance that are shot down, and of course that's news for days. Breaking into everything, special report, all that stuff. But another active attack on ambulances by Israel, with Israeli forces continuing to prevent medical teams from reaching the wounded in the Gaza Strip, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. And it's nothing. You don't hear anything about that on any of these mainstream services, because the lives of Palestinians are, just, and the condition of Palestine, the Palestinian territories in and of themselves are worth less, are less news because of the dehumanization of these people, not just by Israel, but by, Western and American media and culture. The Israeli army announced on Wednesday that 19 of its soldiers were wounded, with 6 in critical condition in a drone and missile strike by Hezbollah in northern Galilee. The strike targeted a building used as a military station by Israeli soldiers in the Palestinian town of Arab al-Amseh in northern Galilee, located in a northern occupied Palestine. The building was hit by a kamikaze drone and several anti-fortification missiles, according to the Israeli army. So essentially, it's the drone that blows up after it's already done. Nothing really that kamikaze about it, because there's no one in the drone. Hezbollah, for his part, claimed responsibility for the attack, saying in a statement that it came in response to previous Israeli strikes on southern Lebanon. The Israeli army declared that it had bombed positions in southern Lebanon, which it claimed were used by Hezbollah. The Lebanese group later mourned 2 of its fighters, whom it said were killed in an Israeli strike on the town of Kfar Kala in southern Lebanon. Lebanese media reported that Israeli bombs, including white phosphorus, were consistently used of white phosphorus, again, by the way, which is supposed to be a war crime, supposed to be something that is completely illegal, and has been proven multiple times since probably like October 8th or 9th, like right in the few days after this war began. Or I should say, this genocide began. They've been using this white phosphorus, again, to no coverage, to no acclaim, to nothing. But Israel and Hezbollah have, of course, been engaged in daily cross-border fighting since October 8th, when Hezbollah began to attack Israeli positions shortly after Israel launched its assault on the Gaza Strip following October 7th attacks. Lebanese authorities have reported that over 313 Lebanese citizens have been killed, including 66 civilians, while Hezbollah announced that 280 of its fighters have been killed. Meanwhile, some 100,000 Lebanese have moved away from their homes in southern Lebanon. On the Israeli side, some 120,000 people have fled the border region in the north. The Israeli army hasn't disclosed its casualty numbers on its northern front. Human Rights Watch has another disturbing story of what we're seeing here. And this, by the way, comes as, I don't know if this is going to come a little bit later in the story, but I think it's important to say, like, this, by the way, we're seeing increased settler rampages, nothing being done to slow this down in any way, shape, or form. This also comes as Netanyahu is making a statement today saying, yeah, thanks for the, little advice or whatever, U.S., but we're going to do it. We're going to invade Rafah. You're not going to stop us. We're going to do it in exactly the way we want. We're also going to retaliate to Iran. All these other countries saying, please, please, please don't get us into nuclear crazy, Armageddon. That means nothing to us. We are also going to use the money that you guys have given us, because again, it's not, as I tweeted out today, it's not, oh, we're going to stop Iran, we're going to stand up strong, we're a proud independent country. No, we need the world to help us, to give us money to expand and invest millions and billions of shekels, which is the Israeli currency, obviously, billions of shekels into the expansion of settlements, or the creation of settlements in the Gaza Strip. It wasn't long before this was going to happen. It was never about Hamas for the government. It was never about the hostages for the government and for a good chunk of the Israeli society. It was about taking back Gaza, taking back Gush Katif, taking back all these settlements that they've already done, because this is what they did them in the pre-Hamas era, in the kind of early 2000s, but they are going to do it at this time like never before, if they have their way, and if they continue to get American money, which is why Saturday night's vote, especially on Israel, is so important, because this is a joke. Like, they're actively laughing in our faces. They are, because this, again, was supposedly U.S. policy to stop this. They have condemned it in the past when Israel kind of makes motions towards it, is pretending something that they're going to be against. But eventually, you'll get to the truth. The mask will finally fall. The game will finally be up. And this will be something that they're going to support. And, very likely scenario is they do it with our money, because we'll give them all this money to fight, quote unquote, Iran, which they've continued to instigate, fight Hezbollah, another place where they've continued to hit civilians. There hasn't been any, civilians hit by Israel, or sorry, by Hezbollah. There's been tons hit by Israel on the Lebanese side. So they're going to use that money to, if it's not spent on weapons, if we're not doing, again, all their work for them, risking our soldiers' lives and our planes to protect their, genocidal apartheid state. We're using American planes and American lives to protect that. And they are probably going to use the money that we give them to perpetuate a genocide, perpetuate an ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and begin work on the settlement. So it's, just a little fun thing, to look forward to, especially as this vote on more Israel aid comes up on Saturday night. But again, this is increased pogroms. The West Bank has been calling it, that the Israeli army is also now taking part on. Not much of a difference, because normally they just stand by and watch it happen. But Human Rights Watch noted in a report that it had investigated settler attacks on 5 Palestinian rural communities on the since 7th of October, and collected testimonies of 27 Palestinian survivors. According to Human Rights Watch, Israeli soldiers took part in these attacks, wearing Israeli army and holding firearms, or army uniforms and holding firearms. The group added that in other cases, the Israeli army failed to protect Palestinians from settler attacks. I don't think I've ever heard of them doing that. But again, this is something that continues to go on as we continue to send them money to laugh in our faces, break all the quote-unquote red lines that we set for them, and also, oh, by the way, commit a genocide of the Palestinian people. All right, last story on the docket today with regards to Arizona. The GOP, they've long been opposed to abortion, but the U.S. Supreme Court's stance of overturning Roe v. Wade in 2022 has much complicated their situation. Anger over Roe's fall was credited with slowing a much-promised red wave in the 2022 midterms, as well as helping abortion rights supporters win a string of ballot measures in red and purple states. Now, before the 2024 elections, many Republicans are attempting to moderate their previously hardline views. After the Arizona Supreme Court's decision last week, multiple Republicans with a history of anti-abortion beliefs denounced the ruling and the ban. Shauna Bolick, a Republican state senator married to one of the justices who sided with the majority to uphold the 1864 ban, called on her colleagues to repeal it, as did Gress. Which is, is pretty crazy, because these are people who are normally pretty pot committed to this. This is, some pretty surprising stuff here, because after days of nationwide debate over this Arizona Supreme Court law here, this, I realized it started from like halfway through this article here by Carter Sherman in The Guardian, by the way. Important to say, last, reporting there was from Monda Weiss in the last story. I apologize for that, but this is from The Guardian and Carter Sherman. Get a little bit too ahead of myself sometimes. But, essentially this bill was written by a pedophile from the Civil War era in territorial Arizona. Go look it up. that is a near total abortion ban, no exceptions, no nothing. They've tried to repeal it. Arizona's Republican-controlled state house has again quashed an effort to repeal the ban, and repealing it would essentially mean putting in all the same restrictive time limits, but with some of the same exceptions for rape, incest, and serious risk to the health of the mother. Republicans hold a one-seat majority in both the Arizona House and Senate on Wednesday, so pretty ideological conformity right there. On Wednesday, shot down a procedural measure in the state house that would have enabled the chamber to vote on a bill to repeal the ban. Just one Republican, the Representative Matt Gress, voted with the House's 29 Democrats, but their 30-30 split was enough to not enough to move forward. Wednesday marked the second time the state legislators have tried to repeal the ban, which was first passed in 1864, since the state Supreme Court ruling. So last week, Gress tried to bring forth a vote on the repeal bill, which, by the way, not only is this historically incredibly unpopular in a swing state, which is Arizona. We've seen much more lenient abortion bans get overturned in places like Kentucky, for example. But there is a ballot measure this November in what's going to be a very, very competitive election. You got the Ruben Gallego, Kerry Lake Senate race in all likelihood. And then, of course, you got the Trump-Biden, Arizona. But there also will be a ballot on this, or ballot measure on this, to repeal this bill, which is going to motivate tons of Democratic voters and not so much Republican voters. So Gress here is trying to knock some sense into his party. However, he then voted with other Republicans to recess until Wednesday. So Gress tried to bring forward the vote on the repeal bill, but essentially voted with the other Republicans and essentially chickened out. The ban, passed before Arizona became a state, only permits abortions to save a woman's life. It does not have exceptions for rape or incest. Due to legal delays, it is not in effect yet. Instead, Arizona currently bans abortion past 15 weeks of pregnancy, which is a bill that the Republicans would be perfectly fine with. So the GOP has long been opposed, again, to abortion, but we've seen Gress and, again, Shauna Bullock, who's, again, this Republican state senator married to one of the justices who sided with the majority to uphold the 1864 ban, calling on her colleagues to repeal it. Donald Trump, who appointed 3 of the U.S. Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe, had said he believes each state should decide its own abortion laws, which essentially throwing up the hands, going with the Republican position, but also to the hard pro-lifers who really care about this stuff, allows way more abortion, because most people are pro-abortion to some extent, especially after the Roe v. Wade and the post-Dobbs dynamic that we are seeing here. So Arizona's ban, he's suggested, will be straightened out by its elected officials. But anyway, hours after the effort scuttled in the state house, Ana Hernandez, a Democratic state senator, successfully introduced a Senate version of the repeal bill, which Senate Democrats will now seek to advance. Due to the Senate's procedural rules, passing that bill will take multiple days. Arizona abortion rights supporters are continuing to gather signatures for a November ballot measure, which would enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. So that's going to be, the ballot measure I was talking about. That would be, incredibly motivating for this. It's going to be very interesting to track, this continued evolution, shall we say, of this issue and the contours of how it shapes out in various Republican parties across the country. Because there's a big chunk of people who support this, and about 75% of the Republican Party, 60% of the Republican Party, who is like, especially electeds, who are like, oh my God, we're going to lose. We need to start being normal on this stat. Yeah, so interesting stuff there, but that's all we got for you guys today. We'll be back tomorrow with News Flash.